Metroid Dread. I'm looking forward to really digging into this one. I think good or bad, there's a lot to talk about here. As always, this will be spoiler light, and before we get into it, I'd like to say that Dread is pretty good. I haven't really played most of the older Metroid games, so I came into Dread without the nostalgia factor that some people have. I'd like to think this helps me be more objective about the quality of the game, but feel free to increase the rating I give the game at the end of the video by at least 1 point if you've been a fan of the franchise for a long time. I enjoyed my overall experience with the game, but I think it has some issues that we need to discuss. So let's start with one of the shallower parts of the game that no one should really be surprised by. I think all I should really have to say about this is that they basically explained the first 4 Metroid games in about 30 seconds at the start of this one. The Metroid series is at its core about exploration, puzzle solving, and combat, with a light sprinkling of story over top to tie it all together. I can't really fault Dread for staying true to that. In fact, I think it's admirable when a game can stay true to its form after 20 years. I certainly prefer a deep and complex narrative, but Dread gives us enough to get by, and there's even a twist or two along the way. Plus, this time, we're escaping from the planet instead of delving into it, unlike all the other games. Riveting stuff. At the end of the game, I wasn't left feeling disappointed, but neither was I blown away. Music is a place I was hoping Metroid Dread would hit very hard, and I was definitely left disappointed. I was never in an area thinking, what the fuck is this music? But the whole soundtrack is just kind of forgettable. There's no Brinstar Depths or Ridley battle themes here worth adding to a playlist. It all more or less fits the mood of the game and doesn't feel out of place, but on a modern title like this, damn, I would have loved a good bop. Not unlike the story, the music doesn't take away from the experience, but I don't really feel like it adds much either. With Metroid, gameplay is really our focus, and I mean it's a video game, so that's apt. It is very nice to see a return to form here. Metroid finally getting a new namesake Metroidvania game is long overdue. Despite this, I think there are a few things worth talking about. The movement in the game is overall pretty good. You can move quickly and the slide feels good, but I found jumping to be very floaty and sometimes unresponsive. Wall jumping sometimes didn't fire, and once you unlock double jump, the strange timing required to perform them was rather frustrating. I must have spent 20 minutes trying to get through the first real platforming section with double jump, simply because I would go for the jump, and Samus would just fall into a slow roll instead of performing the action. This also led to a lot of unnecessary damage while trying to dodge attacks from some of the bosses. Ugh, and the water. God damn, does being underwater feel horrible. It's so slow and tedious. I stayed away from every water section that I could. I think my least favorite movement option was the speed booster. Not only does the game not really explain everything that it can do, but it's tedious to perform. From needing the proper distance to start it up, to the controls for activating Shine Spark, there are a bunch of late game puzzles that need such aggravatingly precise control of Shine Spark. There are some high level players doing some pretty crazy stuff with it already, but I think it feels bad for the average gamer. You can tell me to get good if you want, but I did all the puzzles and it was just my first playthrough with it. I don't mind a challenging task, but it's so awkward to use that it was unnecessarily frustrating. I think a big reason for this is simply the controls and button layout, which honestly may have been my least favorite part of the game. They're god-awful. Just to shoot a missile, you have to hold right bumper and press X, and if you need to free aim it, like you almost always have to do, then you also have to hold left bumper. I can't for the life of me think of why right bumper doesn't just shoot the missile on its own. This is also true for the grapple, which makes you hold right trigger instead of right bumper. It has even less of a reason to be this way. 3 buttons for what should be the simplest action is asinine. Not to mention the morph ball and sliding being the same button. I can't tell you how many times I went to slide to dodge an attack and accidentally morph balled instead. Then, to do anything other than move or jump as a morph ball, you are once again holding multiple buttons. It feels very unnecessary. There's no way to remap these functions in-game. You can change the controller layout within the Switch's settings, but that just changes button locations and not their weird overlapping functions. The other fairly large problem I had with the game were how boring most of the bosses were. I mean, the fundamental combat mechanics aren't incredibly different from the old Metroid games. Most of it involves standing and shooting, repositioning occasionally to stand and shoot some more, at bosses and enemies that are largely damage sponges. Now, this is pretty in line with the Metroid formula, but those games are 20 years old. I'd like to think we have come a long way in those 20 years, so for someone without the nostalgia from the old games, I found it largely boring aside from 1 or 2 of the fights. But that's on me, I guess, for not playing the old games. Now, parrying did feel good, although it's a double-edged sword. The parries are succinct and rewarding, but without them, enemies often feel very tanky when you don't get to one-hit them with a counter. Many of the bosses also rely on the parries, so I'm sorry if you're someone that isn't good at that kind of thing. The game's best feature overall, in my opinion, are the interactive cinematics you get from successful boss parries. There are a lot of games out there with something similar, where you have to press certain buttons while a cinematic plays out to get through it successfully, but the freedom to choose what attacks you're using while an epic battle cinematic is playing feels fucking awesome. I think Dread could have leaned into that a lot harder than they did. I think there's a lot of room to expand and improve that feature, and I really want to see it in more and more games. Like some of the basic combat, a lot of the puzzles felt dated to me. There were a few that were challenging in a good way and felt great to solve. Mostly I think the invisible block trope is just bad. I know it's a big feature in old Metroid games, but again, it's been 20 goddamn years. I don't want to spend 30 minutes shooting at every section of the walls and ceilings when I'm not sure where to go. That's not puzzle solving, it's time gambling. Maybe people disagree with me on this, but I'd be happier with fewer, more impactful puzzles. Frankly, there are too many collectibles in my opinion, that are basically all just missile storage and a little bit of health. I found that around the 50 to 75 missile range, I didn't have to think about ammo anymore, but there are so many, and they feel meaningless to collect outside of seeing that 100 in the completion screen. It's the kind of padding that basically games overall need to cut back on, and Dread isn't even that egregious. Although this brings me to the game length. It took me somewhere between 12 to 15 hours to complete everything in Dread that you can in a single playthrough. You can rush to the end much more quickly. I probably got to the ending around the 9-hour mark and spent the last few hours hunting for the last few collectibles I needed. I ended up taking a long break in the middle just because it wasn't all that fun after a while. There isn't a convenient way to get around to the locations in the end game. I think we needed a stronger form of fast travel for the end. The game starts out feeling surprisingly linear. Your lack of abilities limits you to certain areas, and as you progress, old pathways become blocked off. At first I wasn't a fan of this, but as I continued playing, I realized how tightly designed the game is. Dread doesn't hold your hand at all, but the environment helps lead you to where you need to go and shows you glimpses of areas you can't reach, something to look forward to, and seamlessly weaves your path towards it even as you travel between map areas. And speedrunners are already busting the map open with obscure sequence breaks. I was rather impressed with how great the design feels here. I just wish we had gotten a longer experience. It's one thing when a cheaper indie Metroidvania is a little short, but this is a big Nintendo title, and for a full AAA price tag, I think we deserve a little more. Sadly, Nintendo exclusives rarely go down in price. We haven't talked about the Emmy at all yet. Oh boy. These guys are, well, they're not quite dreadful as the name would suggest. Frankly, I just found the Emmy sections a little annoying. Maybe with the first and second one, you're like, oh man, if they catch me, I'm dead in one shot. You do have some opportunities to parry, but the window is so tight that mostly when you do it successfully, you just got lucky. And they aren't stunned for long, so you have to get moving. I think I like the idea of the Emmy. Metroid games are more focused on methodical exploration, so entering sections where you have to leave behind those tendencies and mad dash to the nearest exit to survive is a great idea in theory. I think in practice, Samus's floaty jump just makes it hard to have that level of urgency. Half the time you just miss a platform or end up grabbing the edge and getting stuck, and then they touch your foot and you start all over. And you just end up at the entrance, which isn't much of a game over. And thank God, because if you got sent way back to your last save point, these sections would probably lead to a lot of broken controllers. I think there needed to be more of a fight between Samus and the Emmy. Maybe a kinder parry window, or maybe the instant-death only happened at a certain health threshold, and actually killing the Emmy always felt really anticlimactic to me. They seem to lose whatever edge they had on you and just slowly meander towards you until you kill them. Like, what happened to that ruthless AI that I was just running from? I like the idea that Emmy are supposed to embody, but I think they missed the mark by just a little bit. Metroid Dread looks very good for a Switch game, and the key here is for a Switch game. It's 2021, and we're in an era where games are coming out in crisp, beautifully rendered 4K quality with near instant load times. I think Dread is held back by the Switch quite a bit. 720p doesn't really cut it anymore. The loading screens weren't horrible, but some of the travel between areas did feel like it took a while, and the game would even stutter sometimes as it was loading the new environment. I think Dread looks about as good as Breath of the Wild did when it came out almost 5 years ago, and obviously Breath of the Wild looks good, and so does Metroid Dread. But also this was 5 years ago, and I think it's starting to show. The Switch even launched with slightly below average hardware, so compared to the competition, it is far behind now. I think Nintendo's choice not to upgrade the hardware with the Switch OLED is possibly pointing to a new console in the near future, but who fucking knows with Nintendo. I can't really complain about the graphics in Metroid Dread, and in my entire playthrough I don't think I encountered a single bug or glitch. but I can't help but think of what this game could have looked like if it had been made for the PS5 or Series X. I've been pretty critical of Metroid Dread. It's sort of my whole thing, but I enjoyed my time playing it. It's a decent game, and compared to other stuff that has come out this year, it may even have the potential to compete for the Game of the Year. But in terms of my honest and critical ranking, I give it a 7 out of 10. Part of this is the short length and full price tag. I get the feeling I'm going to get a lot of flack for this review because by and large people have enjoyed this game a lot. I just think it's important to be critical of the media you consume, and you can love something that isn't perfect. One of my favorite games of all time is Kingdom Hearts, and I don't think I have to tell you that it really isn't that good. You can love and enjoy something, but still be aware of the areas that it could improve upon. If you enjoyed this review, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. I try to put out new content every week, and your feedback helps me do that. I'd love to hear what you thought of the game in the comments below if you've played through it already, and I do recommend playing it at some point. Nintendo prices rarely drop, so I imagine this game will cost the same today as it will a year from now, so pick it up if you can. I'm actually rather excited by how well this game has sold so far, and I think Dread is a great foundation for the future of the Metroid franchise. There's room to improve to be sure, but what really matters is that the game is fun, and by and large, Metroid Dread was fun. Assuming Mercury Stream continues to hold the Metroid IP, I look forward to whatever they make for us next. Until the next time.